Hello and welcome to the UK column. Today I'm joined by someone who needs no introduction, and that is Del Bigtree. Welcome to the program, Del.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's good to be here.
Well, it's a real pleasure. Now, of course, recently you have released your latest film, An Inconvenient Study, and just tell us a little bit about it and why that film came about.
Well, as you probably know, I was a producer on the CBS talk show The Doctors in America. I won an Emmy Award celebrating medicine and science as a television program. While I was doing that show, I stumbled onto the investigation of vaccines. There was a whistleblower inside the CDC that said they were committing scientific fraud on the vaccine safety studies. This was back in 2015, and I made a documentary about that called Vaxxed, which many say sort of ignited the medical freedom movement around the world. From that moment on, I've been taking that investigation further into all the vaccines. That film was just about the MMR vaccine, but what about all the vaccines we're giving our kids? Here in America, it's about 72 doses, 16 different vaccines given in 72 doses by the time you're 18 years old. I want to know, how do we determine they were safe? Because when I was traveling the country with Vaxxed, the second screening of that film, which was incredibly controversial, we had lines down the block because of the controversy, and I want to know who was standing in that audience. So I said, at the second screening, when we started our tour, would everyone with a vaccine-injured child please stand up in the audience? And 3/4 of the audience stood up. I felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I knew that vaccine injury was real. I knew it was a problem. I just made a movie about it, but I'd only interviewed, a handful of families on the issue. And here I'm staring at, 50 families that lives have been changed forever. I asked that question every single day for an entire 1-year tour, probably 4 times a day, 5 days a week, for an entire year, and every time I asked that question, 3/4 of the room stood up. And you realize that this is a massive, massive problem that is somehow being buried. They're humiliating these people. They're screaming on the television that it's not real, it's not happening. These parents are suffering at home. So obviously that's been a focus of my work. When I was traveling the country with Vaxxed back in 2016, someone said to me as we were passing up through Michigan, I know the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Health. Henry Ford Health is one of our biggest research institutes in America, and therefore really one of the biggest research institutes in the world. And they said, would you like to meet him for dinner? I said, sure. And so we sat down to dinner, and, he said his name was Dr. Marcus Zervos, and he said something very interesting when he sat down. He said to me, Del, I've watched your film Vaxxed. It's very compelling, but you keep saying something at these speeches you're giving around the country that I found very troubling. You keep saying that they've never done the proper science to say that vaccines are safe. And he said, so I sit on the biggest databases in the world, and I went and researched that so I could show you the data, show you the science. And he said to me, and I'm shocked that I have to sit across from you and tell you you're right. I did not realize we have never done a proper safety evaluation of any of the childhood vaccines that are in the program. And he said to me, now that doesn't mean that vaccines aren't safe. It just means we can't say that they're safe. And I said, that's all I'm saying. And so that's all I've been saying the whole time. So anyway, we had a very nice dinner, and he said, I'm pro-vaccine. He brags about he's the reason that they have a mandatory vaccine program at Henry Ford Health. He said, so I don't know what I could do for you. I said, well, since you really believe in the program and you're a great researcher, world famous, in fact, he had just gotten through a big investigation of the Flint, Michigan water crisis. In Flint, Michigan, the health department came under fire for having lead pipes and lead water that was poisoning less affluent neighborhoods. And he stood up for those people, proved it scientifically, and came out against the health department. So he was a brave scientist also. Anyway, I said, would you ever consider doing a study that compares the health outcomes of vaccinated children with completely unvaccinated children? And then just let's see who's healthier. And he said, sure, I would do that study. I was shocked, really, because there's something about mainstream medicine that has refused to do this study for decades. It seems like the most obvious study known to man. Why is it the CDC can't show us a study of here's vaccinated compared to unvaccinated? And the vaccinated are far healthier. They're living longer. They have less cancer. They have less autism. They have less ADHD. They have less skin issues, psoriasis, eczema, gut dysbiosis, all the things that our kids are suffering from. Why can't they show us a study that the vaccinated are the healthiest among us? And not just here in America. Why has the NHS never done this study? Why is it that not a single regulatory medical agency in the world has ever compared these two groups of people and showed us, see, the vaccinated are the healthiest? So anyway, I was shocked he said he would do it, and we left the dinner. It took a couple of years. I kept calling him saying, hey, you're going to do that study? Finally, by about 2018 or 19, he gave us a very firm, I will do this study. I said, look, I only have one rule. I'm pretty sure you're pro-vaccine, so it's gonna be a robust study. But whatever the outcome, promise me you'll publish it, because a lot of doctors come under attack for questioning the vaccine program. Tell me you're going to follow through. He said, I will follow through. I'll follow the data where it leads me. So he did that study, and it was finished in 2020. It's a study of over 18,000 children, so it's a very big study. Roughly 2,000 of which were unvaccinated. So 16,000 vaccinated, 2,000 unvaccinated, and then he didn't publish the study. And so I called, and for a while he wouldn't answer, but eventually he did. I said, I don't understand why. I thought we had an agreement you would publish the study. He's like, no, I really just, it's just not something I can do at this time. And he kept pushing it off. So finally I asked him, can I fly out and have dinner with you? He said, sure. And I did something I don't usually do as a journalist, which is I decided to take hidden cameras with me and recording equipment. Because I had a feeling this was the last time this study would ever be discussed. Whatever was in it, I hadn't even seen it yet, but whatever's in it, I want to know, I want to hear it, and maybe someday I'll be able to show the public what happened here. So that's what I did. I went out, I think it was around 2022, I went out and had dinner, and I have hidden camera footage of him explaining that it's a good study, that he would publish it just as it is. Only one problem, he will lose his career. This will be the end of his career. When I say why, he handed me the study, and that study is now published. It's now published on the Senate website. He didn't publish it, but Senator Ron Johnson got a hold of it this year and said, I'm going to put it on the Senate website. I think this is for the public good, which gives him some leeway, I guess, on copyright issues. But the study is very, very disturbing, Mike. It shows that the conclusion is 2.5 times the rate of chronic disease amongst the vaccinated if you compare them to the unvaccinated. So you're 2.5 times more likely. A good study would show a 40% increase in a problem or an 80% increase. We're talking about a 250% increased risk of having chronic disease. When you look at some of the details in it, neurodevelopmental disorders, nearly 6 times the rate. So I'm sure we're going to get into all those details, but that's the heart of this film, An Inconvenient Study, is this study, how it came about, and the hidden camera footage where, I'm under attack by Henry Ford Health. They sent the cease and desist letter. They're trying to say it's defamation, to say that they didn't publish the study because of the results and all those things, but we can get into that.
Yes. I was just going to say it's interesting because obviously the film's been out for a few weeks now. It's millions of people have seen it so far. Yeah. The cat is definitely out of the bag. Yeah. But what I'm noticing, because you use the term robust study, and what I'm noticing in the coverage of it out there, the mainstream press is now, any coverage of it is attacking the study for being not robust and being having issues. So, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, and I'm first of all, I want to say I'm glad that I have no problem with people attacking the study. That's the scientific method. That's what should have happened from the beginning. This study should have been put into peer review and set up for publishing, and then let every scientist weigh in on what they think the quality of the study is and all those other things. What I can tell you is this, that, Dr. Marcus Zervos is the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Health. he was in charge of the arm of the Moderna trials at Henry Ford Health. I'm not aware of anyone ever questioning his ability to do a study before. So when he does the study, I'm pretty sure he knows how to do it. And when he says to me at dinner multiple times, it's a good study, but they're going to say it's a bad study. They're going to attack me. They're going to come after my career because, as he says in this, in the video you'll see, because it's political. So those are his statements, and that's why I think it's important that people see the film. You can tell that I'm not, pressuring him in any way. You can see it's a very interesting human study, this film, to see the angst and the tension that he has with the desire to do what's right, but not the courage to do it. I'll also say this, that yes, of course, every retrospective study there has limitations to it. It is not the perfect way to do science. A retrospective study is, we've got to simply look at people that have already made their choices. We're not setting up a perfectly controlled study. We don't have a placebo group that we control. We can't perfectly match age and gender and race and all the things you would do in a really good scientific study. All the things, every one of these vaccines should have had that study. We should have done that study before these products were ever put on the market. And that's the entire point, really, of this film. They have skipped the safety testing. They have skipped those studies where we would have seen, does it have side effects? How many side effects? What are the actual side effects? Because we would have tracked these vaccines like we do every drug for 2 to 10 years and a placebo group, so that when you have an issue like, let's say, autism, you can say, hey, there was just the same amount of autism in the group that got the vaccine as the group that didn't get the vaccine. That's how science is done, but that study has never, ever been done. But
it's worse than that, though, isn't it? Isn't it worse than that? Because it's not just that the studies haven't been done on the individual vaccines. The studies haven't been done on how these vaccines interact with each other. And if you're giving, I don't know what, in the United States, I don't know how many vaccines are given at one time to a baby.
Sometimes up to 13 vaccines in one sitting.
So how would you even do a study for that?
Yeah, I guess give a child 13 vaccines and give another one saline, 13 placebo saline injections, and now let's at least track them for a couple months, if not years. But you're right, never been done. And now when you ask for any study like that, some form of a controlled study, because look, it's not like we aren't seeing serious health problems. In the United States, I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you if we had the healthiest children we'd ever seen. If they were just this glowing, radiant, disease-free children running and the envy of the world, but it's not the case. In America, our children 54% of them have a chronic disease. Robert Kennedy Jr. just pointed out that 76.4% of adults now have chronic disease, which means they need drugs. It's a lifelong disability. Only 75% of America's children could not join the military because they cannot pass the health exam. That makes us the sickest nation of children in the industrialized world. It also makes us, this is the sickest generation of children we've ever seen. And so, with those types of health records, and you never did safety studies, we don't know, is all the eczema, all the psoriasis, all the diabetes, all the lupus, all the multiple sclerosis, all the neurological disorders, all the speech delays, all the Tourette syndrome, on and on and on. It's due to something. It is happening because of some toxic attack, because we've gone from 12.8% chronic disease just in the 1980s. Just 40 years ago, we were at 12.8% chronic disease in our children. Now that's skyrocketed to 54% in 40 years. Genes don't change that fast. We don't evolve that fast. There's no explanation for this other than our kids are being poisoned by something. And And what I would say is when you look at autoimmune disease, or let's call it immune dysregulation, which is the crisis of our times. I don't know what the stats are in England, but I'm sure they're horrible. I'm sure you're having skin allergies and issues and diabetes and many of the same things that we have here. But here in America, when you look at what that is your immune system has somehow gotten dysregulated. It's confused, and it's now attacking the cells of your own body. This is something that isn't happening to any other mammal on the planet. Why? They're breathing the same pollution. They're even swimming in the same polluted ocean, but we are not seeing autoimmune disease. We're not seeing their immune systems now attacking their own bodies. And so people will say to me, well, Del, how do you know it's not the fluoride in the water that we have in our water here? How do you know it's not the glyphosate, the pesticides and herbicides that we're spraying on 90% of the crops that we eat? How do you know it's not the hormones in our beef, or the plastics, or the forever chemicals? By the way, every one of those things, Robert Kennedy Jr. talks about this. The EPA did a study when we look at the skyrocketing rate of autoimmune disease. When did it start? It starts right in the early 1990s, right where all of those things become prolific in our society here in America. So it's going to be one of about 5 to 6, 7 different toxic pollutants that's really hit our environment, including vaccines. But what I want to say is this: if the issue is immune system dysregulation, of all those things I've just listed, shouldn't we look closest at the one product amongst them that was designed to dysregulate your immune system, to kick it into overdrive, to incite it into action artificially? There's a product that does it. It's the vaccines. So, when I stop someone on the street and say, what's the vaccine to do? They go, well, it's a tiny bit of virus or bacteria, I guess. And, because it's so small or they kill it, somehow my body's tricked into thinking it's had the disease and I develop immunity. Okay, so we're tricking our immune system, but we're not tricking it one time, not 5 times, not 10 times, not 20 times, not 50 times, 72 times and growing more and more every single year. 72 times we trick the immune system of our children, and then we're shocked that these same children have immune systems that are totally gone haywire and are now attacking their own bodies. To me, it seems obvious. But look, that is just a hypothesis. How do you test that hypothesis? How do we test if it's vaccines that are doing it? When you ask for those controlled tests now, they say it would be unethical to do those studies. We can't have a placebo group now because we have vaccines available to these kids, and we can't make them vulnerable to vaccine-preventable diseases just to do a study. So see, they got us. They got us hogtied. Our hands are tied behind our back, our feet behind our back, and the pharmaceutical industry has gotten away with never doing a safety test, now refusing to do a safety test because, that would be unethical. And then when you do the last study that's available to you, a retrospective study, they point out the flaws. Well, it didn't have a control. It didn't have a proper control. You didn't perfectly match race to blah, blah, blah. And that's what they're doing to this study. But Peter Gutcha has been posting a lot about this. He's one of the founders of the Cochrane collaboration. I think we just call it Cochrane now. A world-renowned scientific group that set out to raise the standards of scientific investigation. And he's been posting that he has looked closely at this study, and he says it perfectly. I have seen what Henry Ford is complaining about this study, but those anomalies, those potential confounding issues cannot explain the size of the differential that we're essentially seeing here. We're not seeing a 20% increase in neurodevelopmental disorders. We're seeing a 600% increase in the scale that they do at the end of the study. They look at, over time, over 10 years, what would be your odds, what would be the risk of having chronic disease. And what they discover is the vaccinated, 57% of those children vaccinated will have a chronic disease by the time they're 10 years old. More than half. That's now a coin toss. Like, I want my kid to be healthy. It's a coin toss if you're vaccinating them. Meanwhile, the unvaccinated in this study, 2,000 of them, what it shows for them, 17% of them will have a chronic disease. That is an astronomical difference that cannot be explained by, well, there's a few more, African American children on the vaccinated side, or there was some birth difficulties. All that should be looked at. And I'll also say this: the study does a very brilliant job of testing its weaknesses. For instance, one of the weaknesses they say is that the follow-up time, the amount of years that they follow the children that are unvaccinated, was shorter. And so that's not fair, that some diseases may appear later on in the vaccinated group that didn't appear in the unvaccinated group. Perfectly reasonable argument. But in the study, they limit the study so that, let's just look at all the kids that were only in it for 1 year. And what do they find? The vaccinated have even higher rates of chronic disease. Then they limit it to all the children, both unvaccinated and vaccinated, that had to be in the program for 3 years. Same thing, worse for the vaccinated. And then lastly, 5 years. So when they tested timing, it actually got worse for the vaccinated. So every way they looked at it, and then they'll try to say, well, unvaccinated kids aren't going to their doctors as often. This is one of the arguments that's made against. There's been several studies like this, by the way, and we'll get into that in a minute. But that's the argument that's always made. Well, the unvaccinated don't go to doctors. I mean, you could argue probably because they're so healthy, given what you're seeing in this study. But they did some controls. They said, let's limit it. Let's not have any kids that never go to doctors. Let's say you have to at least go to the doctor once a year while you're in the program. And what they saw is it didn't change the outcome. And one other thing they noticed, when you looked at the serious illnesses like asthma, like, some, I forget the exact categories, but the ones where there were unvaccinated children that had it, they found that sick unvaccinated children go to the doctor about 5 times a year on average, and 7 times was the average for the vaccinated. So what it shows us is, if an unvaccinated child is sick, they go to the doctor. Their parents aren't crazy. They're like, my kid's having a speech delay or whatever it is. I'm going to go to the doctor and check this out. So this idea that the unvaccinated were just not seeing their illness because they don't go to doctors, I think that's even disproven in the study. And so those are the attacks that are happening. And I'll just say this. You can attack the study. That's the scientific method. And it should have happened the other way around. It should have been published, by Henry Ford. It shouldn't have been published by the Senate, but they're not going to do it. And so now we're looking at an unpublished study, and we're asking questions. The only question that should be asked, that I ask at the end of this film, is why are there about 4 or 5 other studies exactly like this? All of them, they've tried to attack them, but they're all showing the exact same signal. In every one of these studies, one is by a Dr. Mawson out of the University of Mississippi. He did a homeschool study of homeschool children and found very similar results. I think 5 times the rate of neurodevelopmental disorders, 4 times the rate of asthma, very similar to what this Henry Ford study. Dr. Paul Thomas out in Oregon here in America had a huge pediatric practice, and he was open-minded. He let people they didn't want to vaccinate, he let them come to his practice. He would still see those kids, and he realized, oh my God, I could do a robust study of my unvaccinated compared to my vaccinated children. He did that. He lost his license for doing that study. That study was so horrifying that they immediately went in and threatened and ultimately took his license away. And that's what happens to doctors and scientists that ask this question. But here's the thing. The Henry Ford study was not done by Dr. Paul Thomas that is open to not vaccinating children. It wasn't done, viewing homeschool students, which is, was 600 kids. This was tens of thousands of children in a very pro-vaccine. They brag about their vaccine program. Dr. Mark Zervos does himself. This study was done to prove those other studies wrong and ended up doing the opposite, proved them right. That, to me, makes this, now you're talking about what we call reproducible science, something that almost doesn't exist in this world. Most editors of research and of magazines like British Medical Journal or The Lancet, many of them have come out and said, we can't reproduce half the science that's being published in this magazine. Yet this science is being reproduced over and over again. So as far as I'm concerned, go ahead, poke holes, but you can't undo what we're learning in this study until someone on this earth with a larger database than Henry Ford Health has can do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated comparative study and show us for the first time, it'd be the first time they've achieved it, that the vaccinated are healthier. I want to know why that study hasn't been done. I want to know why they aren't doing it right now. Why are they saying we're rushing to it? Why isn't UK saying we're on it? You know what? We're going to prove Bigtree and Dr. Marcus Zervos wrong and Henry Ford Health. That's I think the issue of our time. I believe you're seeing how powerful the pharmaceutical industry is. It has controlled this conversation for a very, very long time. And as you just put it, with this film and this study and the other studies that come before it, the cat is out of the bag.
It's interesting because, you know, if the pharmaceutical industry was confident in what they were doing, if it was confident in their product, they should be welcoming studies. They shouldn't be attacking it. We saw this during COVID as well. Doctors were speaking out against the pharmaceutical industry and against the rush to get COVID vaccines out. Were attacked in the same way. You know, you said that the attacks were appropriate, but I'd just like to get some thoughts on you about the types of attacks, because in a peer-reviewed study, it's scientists considering the contents of a paper. They are looking at it with some rigor. A lot of the attacks that I'm seeing in the press don't have that rigor, and they're quite populist in their approach. So this isn't the same kind of attack as would be seen on a peer review process. And so I'd just be interested in get your thoughts on that.
Well, exactly. I mean, and that's what, you know, we've all seen these videos now when you watch the news where they were all saying the same thing from COVID. The vaccine is 95% effective, 95% effective, yada, 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 yada. And they stood by it and they were wrong. I just watched a great mashup just this morning that was showing how many times Donald Trump said he believed that the actual death rate of COVID was going to be well below 1%. And all the news pundits that said that's a lie. WHO has said it's 3.4% death across the world. He's lying. That's misinformation. Well, now we look back and we know he was exactly right. You know, whether you take Ioannidis, the great work out of, I think it's Stanford, we see a death rate from COVID of about 0.35%, maybe 0.2%, as high as the worst would have maybe been a study shows 0.5%. So a half of 1%. So Donald Trump was right, yet we've never had an apology by a single one of those pundits, not a single one of our news anchors, not a single one of the doctors or scientists or any from the Imperial College apologizing for the disastrous statements they made, the panic they created by the true misinformation, the social distancing. We have now recognized that standing 6 feet apart or locking ourselves in our home was not based in science. It was arbitrary because that's what was admitted in a congressional hearing by Tony Fauci himself. We know that the masks could never stop a particle as small as a coronavirus. So what I would say is, no matter what we do now, we now live in a world where we have to take everything these news anchors and the experts that they bring on, we have to take that with a grain of salt and say, I have watched every one of these people completely lie or have it dead wrong at the very least, so to be completely uneducated on the topic that they claim to be experts in, and yet I'm still waiting for an apology for the original mistake. And so when these people now attack a study like this, the same way they attacked the Dr. Peter McCulloughs and the you know Dr. Robert Malone's and all of the scientists and doctors that came forward during COVID to say we shouldn't lock down, this is going to cause more harm than good, you know, we should now really think about, maybe I should be listening to the people and the scientists that are saying, this is an important study. This study should be seen. This study, you know, really could save lives. All things that are, you know, a part of this film, and many of which that Dr. Marcus Zervos said himself about this study. The only reason he's not publishing it, because he's afraid. He's afraid of being attacked by the media that is controlled by you know, he didn't say the pharmaceutical industry. I will say by the pharmaceutical industry. So yeah, when you look at this, and what I mean is I don't mind the attacks. I'm not going to be like the scientists that are covering up all of this evidence. What I'm saying is please attack. Let's have an open debate. Let's meet in public forums and point out what your issue is with this study, and we'll bring our scientists in and defend it. And let's let the chips fall where they may. But I think you're going to have a hard time poking enough holes in this study. And I'm happy to see, real scientific interaction on this study. But in the end, that's just a game happening in science. And in the end, we have news anchors that don't know anything about this issue. Meanwhile, we can sit here and wait till someone finally tells us, yes, that building is actually burning. Or we could go in and get our kids out of it right away and not wait for someone to tell us that building looks like it's burning. I think I can make the decision for myself.
Let's just come back on to the film itself for a minute. So you said that you did something that you don't normally do, which is to take secret cameras or hidden cameras with you. Why did you decide to do that?
For two reasons. Number one, this wasn't really, a news story for me. I'm a reporter. I report, I have whistleblowers that stay off the record. I'm fine with that. This was about a challenge, man to man with a scientist. Do this study, and however the chips fall, publish that study. In a way, it's like a bet. It's a wager. I made a wager with a scientist. I'm going to wager that the vaccinator is sicker. But go ahead. Whoever wins, they get the pot. And we didn't get the payoff. This guy did the study, and so on that level, he had to come to terms with that. And I just thought, if this study shows what I think it studies, it's going to, if it shows what I think it's going to find, then it's important for the world to know that. And I can't just, know it's there and not be able to do anything about it. I'm just not wired that way, Mike. In some ways, I've been attacked before at being an activist, not a journalist. That may be the case. That may be a decent argument. I remember when there was the earthquakes in Haiti, I was working on the doctor's television show. And so we went in to, both bring doctors and medical supplies, but also to capture everything that was there. And I remember children suffering, people caught, trapped, a woman with a broken hip. And I'm supposed to, as a reporter, really just shoot that, show how there's really no one around to help them. Mike, I'm not wired that way. I'm not going to just watch this person die for a news story. I dropped the camera. I carried people, to safety. I helped, military put up med tents, all of which would have made great video footage for television, but I cared more about the people. So that's how I'm wired. That's just, if that means I'm not a great journalist, I don't know. When I watch these journalists just sit there and watch a kid getting shot to death in the street, it's an important job. I'm not going to put that down. That is true journalism. So let me be clear, that's not me. I'm not that. I'm going to run out. I'm going to try and get that kid out of harm's way. And that's what I felt like in this situation. I'm going to go and bring recording equipment. I don't know if it will ever see the light of day. I didn't know what I would do with it. I didn't have some plan with it. I just thought, this will be the last time this study will ever be spoken of on a professional level, potentially, if I can't talk him into publishing it, which was the main reason I had that dinner, was to just try and talk him into publishing this study. But if he's not going to publish it, then I want the world to know why, and that's why I took in the recording equipment. And look, I'm happy I did. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, the world, or at least significant number of people now, does know why the paper's in the public. The conversation that you had with them is more or less in the public. So what has the response been to the film so far?
It's been really amazing, as you said. I mean, it's hard to track at this point worldwide, what the viewership, because we're giving it away for free. Everyone can watch it at inconvenientstudy.com. This is just a film made by my nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. I haven't checked this week's numbers. I've been doing a lot of television, radio, and speaking all over the country. But the last I checked, we're in the tens of millions of views. It's being shared. We see hundreds of thousands of people downloading it, which means they could be sharing it in spaces we don't see it anymore. I've heard about watch parties all over the world, 10, 20 people in a room. I get texts saying you got a standing ovation in the hall that we were showing it. So, and what we see online is, I think the last I checked, 85% of the responses were positive. And I'm glad to see that, as I've said, that there's people that are challenging it and saying, well, I have this question with it. I think all of that is important. In some ways, I believe, and I'm sort of bragging, that I think this film and this study may have just jump-started the scientific method, something that has been dead in the world. Certainly COVID, put it on life support, and it has been struggling. So I love the debate that's happening. And I just think when you see some of the people that are weighing in, a lot of the ones that are coming against it, I think, are just reading the cease and desist letter by Henry Ford Health. They're not reading the study itself. They're not even going far enough to watch the film or any of that. That's how they dealt with COVID. That was my beef with COVID. I'm sure it was yours, is show me the evidence that this vaccine is 95% effective against infection and transmission, because all I could find was the emergency use authorization that was put out by the FDA themselves saying this study didn't even look to see if it stopped transmission. So I have been calling out the lies from the beginning, and in the end, people can just take people's opinions for it. If we want to live in a world where we let other people decide the perspectives that we have, then I don't think we have a strong and bright future ahead of us. But instead, if people want to know, this is a very short, concise film. I'm very proud of it. We worked hard to not, pack our opinions into it, but to just state the facts as they now exist. And this is really the culmination. If Vaxxed was out in 2016, 9 years, later, this is the investigation. I've been suing the government of the United States since 2017, and winning and getting to the bottom of this issue. Where is the transparency of science? I've had an international team of scientists read every single vaccine trial that has ever taken place. And I have one of the greatest constitutional attorneys in the world, in Aaron Siri, that won back here in America. We have a mandated vaccine program, and in some states, there's no way to opt out of it, like Mississippi. So we spent 3 years in court and won back your right to opt out of the vaccine program with your children. And in Mississippi, we're in the middle of that case in West Virginia. But I'll say to people, because I get labeled, someone who spreads misinformation, we've won, multiple lawsuits against the government in the United States. And you should try to win lawsuits against the government of the United States with misinformation. It's not happening. It is not what's going on here. The misinformation is coming from our government agencies. And look, you can understand why. They have promoted these products for decades, making us believe there's mountains of evidence that they don't cause autism, mountains of evidence that it's not causing the multiple sclerosis and the diabetes and all the ADHD that are all skyrocketing at this time. What are they going to do if they have to admit, we're sorry, oops, we got it wrong? They haven't even admitted they got it wrong on COVID. Imagine an entire vaccine program that's created the autoimmune disease crisis of the century.
I mean, is this a partisan issue for people in the States? Because, I mean, the damage that's being done to children in the last 30, 40 years, as you say, isn't partisan. So, because it doesn't only attack Democrats or only attack Republicans, it's everybody. But is the issue of vaccination and even the issue of COVID, is that sort of a partisan thing?
It has become that amongst the population. I would say in the population more than probably in our elected officials. You have very, very few, I think less than a handful of actual politicians. The politicians that will speak out against the vaccine program now and ask good questions is Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, Ron Johnson, and then President Trump. Beyond that, those are Republicans, so they are weighted to Republicans. But The rest of the hundreds of them are pro-vaccine because the number one most powerful lobby in the United States of America is pharma. And they all get visited by pharma. And they all get their campaigns funded by pharma. And pharma has lobbyists in their office every other day telling them how great the work that they do are and how many lives that they're saving. And so, but amongst the people, when you see polls there, it's clear that conservatives in the Trump's populist movement, if you will, vaccine hesitancy, which is what I like to call it, is really very high. But I'm hearing stats about the COVID vaccine in England that 90% of your own doctors aren't taking the booster shot, which means for the first time in history, and we're seeing, I think, something very similar here, that means there's a total lack of trust in the health agencies now, even by doctors themselves. So I think this issue is growing. I wouldn't say it's completely partisan, but at the moment, conservatives tend to lean more in this direction, and I think that's because Donald Trump has been so outwardly critical of the vaccine program. He obviously brought in Robert Kennedy Jr. to run HHS, which is maybe the most controversial pick in the history of mankind. I'm a little bit biased in that. I was Robert Kennedy Jr.'s director of communications when he ran for president of the United States, so I'm proud of how that worked out. We ran him as president so that he could get in control of the health agencies. Health has been his number one concern for, I think 40 or 50 years, has been one of the greatest environmental attorneys of all times. So we have someone that knows about law, knows about health, knows how the frauds take place, know how the corruption is. We have an anti-corruption government now in our health agency with Robert Kennedy Jr., Dr. Marty McCary, Dr. Mehmet Oz, Jay Bhattacharya. I mean, one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration is the head of our National Institutes of Health, the most funded research, institute in the world. You've got Martin Koldorf, also of the Great Barrington Declaration, is the head of our Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So things are changing, and I think because that's happening under President Trump, you have the anything but Trump, or the Trump derangement syndrome, as we call it here, pushing Democrats against their own best interests. So that's how it sort of lays out in America.
There's another 2.5 years of Trump's presidency to go, or 3 years of Trump's presidency to go. What happens after?
I mean, that's, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned what the backlash or the response is going to be. The pharmaceutical industry, because look, as we've said, right, no matter how much as a civilization we are waking up, shows like yours and mine are millions of people. This film, An Inconvenient Study, will probably be seen by 1 billion people around the world, at least by the time it's gone through. But yet, no apology from any of the news anchors that we watch. No apology from any of the hospitals that kept us from seeing our loved ones that used remdesivir and ventilators and killed 9 out of 10 of their patients during COVID. Blocked the use of ivermectin, which has been now proven in studies all around the world to reduce death by 80%. Blocked the use of hydroxychloroquine, which was in studies around the world reduced death by 50%, certainly if given early. All of these things, blood of millions of people is on their hands, and yet not one apology on that one vaccine and that one, pandemic. So when you see that, all of the institutions of power, all the WHO, all the Gavis, all the Bill Gates, everyone is still lined up to maintain control of the world. And let's make it perfectly clear, there is no greater way to control the world than through their health. And though many of these things are sold to us as health initiatives, let's go ahead and look at the, Kenya situation, where we know that they used vaccines to sterilize women in Kenya. We've seen issues like that in India. Here in America, we use vaccines to cull our deer population, our wild deer population. Vaccines are used in animal populations to sterilize them and slow their expansion and their growth. That, I believe, is not necessarily what it's being used for. I want to be clear, I'm not being a conspiracy theorist, but I assure you, in a nation where your leaders keep telling you we're overpopulated, we need to reduce population, and then those same people put the most of their investment into your vaccine programs, then you've got to start listening to them. If they're saying their goal is to reduce population, injection, and they're lining you up telling you should never ask a question about what we're injecting into you, then that is a recipe for a world that you do not want to live in. So we have a lot of work to do. That's why this film is so critical that everyone shares it with everyone they know. We still have a vote in America. You still have a vote in the UK. The only way we can get out around the power of the pharmaceutical industry and these globalist lunatics is the power of the people. We outnumber them, but we have to outnumber them. Those in the knowing have to outnumber those that don't care. And that's why a film like this is so important, that everyone shares. It's why we've made it free. We're not trying to make money off of it. I want it there for everyone in the world to see it. And then with one gigantic loud voice, we should demand every regulatory agency of every nation that we live in to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study and prove this Henry Ford study wrong. If you can't, then we need to do an immediate change. We have to make an immediate reversal, because it appears we are destroying the future of our species. And if we keep rushing products like the COVID vaccine onto the market without proper safety testing and forcing everyone on the planet to take it, our days are numbered. I don't see how we survive this. We've never had a virus that has ever affected enough people to kill us off this planet. But when we have stupid leaders and bad science and funded pharmaceutical, agendas, we could be really in harm's way.
Okay, well, look, we're just about out of time, so just one final question. And do you think that that this film has the potential to make sure that if in the not-too-distant future a COVID-like gag gets played again, that we won't fall for it?
If this film can't do it, I don't know what will. I mean, I really mean that. I think this film lays out as clearly as anyone can understand it. And look, if you see my text, it's just thousands. They're coming in by the thousands. The emails are coming in by the tens of thousands of people saying exactly this. I could not explain this to my loved one. I just showed this film and now they get it and they're sharing it with everyone they know. You gotta see this film. You can say, oh, I know that information, and you probably do, but we've never had a tool like this that lays it out this clearly and has this study by such a clearly, biased, institution that should have been able to make it look like the vaccinated were healthier and could not do it. In fact, shows such alarming rates of illness. It is mind-boggling. So yes, I think that this study is a game changer. I think this film is a game changer. I haven't made another movie since Vaxxed. There's been other good movies that have come out, but there hasn't been anything that I thought had the value or the size or the ability to do what Vaxxed did back in 2016. This is that movie. This is the one I was proud to make, and this is the culmination of all of the work that I've done with my nonprofit over the last 9 years.
Okay, well, Del Bigtree, thank you very much for joining me today. Just tell everybody where they can watch the film one more time.
Just go to Inconvenient Study.com. You can download the film. You can download the trailer. You can stream it there. You can share links with your friends. And by the way, we are posting all of the attacks that have been made against it with rebuttals on why we think those attacks are not rooted in science. So it's all there. We're not hiding everything. We're being very, open about everything that everyone's saying and having that discussion. You can find all of that and the study itself. You can download the study. You can read it yourself and come to your own conclusions, which is what we have to start doing. We've got to do our own research. So, and InconvenientStudy.com. You can watch the HighWire.com, where I have a show every week that discusses these issues.
Del, thank you.
Thank you, Mike.